Today on 3D Outdoors, we're going to be talking about advanced bottom bouncer tactics right after this. All right, you've probably seen our basics video on bottom bouncers put out years ago. This has been well overdue. We've been talking about doing this for a while, so here it is. Bottom bouncers, piece of lead on a bent wire that basically keeps your bait from getting tangled up in anything that it might be going over the bottom. Your line to your rod goes out the top, and whatever rig you put on the back of here goes back here, and then you pull this along and it's riding across the bottom, or we'll get to that in a minute, perceived bottom, what I call it. You may have not heard that before. I may have made that up, but we'll go over that in a minute here. It goes along the bottom, your rig hangs out here and keeps it from getting tangled up or keeps it from dragging in the mud, whatever. Can you make these yourself? Yes, you can. Safety disclaimer, lead is dangerous. It is poisonous. Yes, I'm touching it. I'm going to wash my hands. I do in the boat all the time. If you take precautions, you're fine. But if you're melting this and putting it in a mold and putting it on a wire like this, or making jig heads or weights, anything like that, you must do it in a well-ventilated area with all other safety precautions in. Enough lead in your system will make you get dementia-like symptoms and eventually kill you. So be very careful around lead. Even if you're not molding it, please wash your hands. Just be safe. So with that out of the way, let's go to the next thing. Rigs. I used to make all my own, and it was for financial reasons, really. I could save a couple dollars per rig, and if I was fishing and I had my kids all with me, that was a lot of rigs in the water at one time, so I could save a bunch of money if I got busted off, bit off, whatever, by making my own. It is time consuming, but like I said, I had my kids with me. They'd actually help me. We'd sit around at night, get everything ready to go, and then we could go fishing, and it was great. And the pride that you got from making your own. Now, I still tie some of my own, yes. You can make them with individual blades, different hook styles, different number of hooks, different colors of beads, all kinds of things like that. I even have a little box with everything in it, different hooks in the top, different beads in there. So yes, I still, all the items needed to make them, a whole box full of it. I still make them when I have time. That's the key right there, is time. You would think I'd have more time now. I actually have less. So with the needs that I have with rigs, I have actually went to purchasing them. 3 major companies that I deal with on this. This is not paid promotion at all. These are all items that I bought. You may see a video online where I won one of the contests with one of these companies, but that has no way influenced anything here. This is not paid. I purchased all these myself. Watch online with these companies. They run sales like Black Friday sales and midsummer sales. Great deals on their items, 20% off sometimes. Great time. Just buy up a bunch of them. It's easy and it is inexpensive nowadays. We have JB Lures. Buy a lot of their stuff. This one here you can see has a blade and a single hook, usually meant for a single minnow. Probably has about a 4-foot leader on it. Walleye Nation Creations, another great company. You can see this one here has a blade on it. This one has a float. So the float in behind there can raise that bait up. Say you're watching the walleyes on your graph and they're up off the bottom. Use your electronics. You can adjust the depth at what it rides by using a floated item. Northland, get a lot of their stuff. This one has a blade and a float on it and 2 hooks. Well, what's the 2 hooks for? Well, usually that's for crawler harness is what we call it. You poke it through the nose of the crawler and then behind the belt, and it strings it out behind there. Now Dale's used it to put 2 minnows on it once before, and that's worked as well. So that's a possibility also. And then you have the slow death rig, and this has a little spinner with a slow death hook. Let me tell you, slow death hooks in the middle of the summer heat with a crawler is my favorite rig for midsummer fishing. And it works. You'll see I'm running video in the background or on the side. I might have me shrink down on one side. It works. I have caught tons of walleyes on slow death hooks. And I make a lot of my own rigs, a lot of plain ones. I prefer the Mustad hooks. Again, they didn't pay for anything for me to say that, but the Mustad Ultra Point slow death hooks are awesome. I tie a lot of my own rigs for that, for my own personal use. If you look at the back, they'll tell you to cut off half the crawler. Little tip from me, you can follow their instructions if you want. I use the entire crawler. I just really love that action that it creates with that long crawler out the back, and it works for me. You'll see in the video here, caught a bunch of walleyes this year using slow death and full crawlers. And you can get them different colors. There's the plain hook, there's red hook. I like the reds. So there is a little bit about rigs. You can make your own, you can make multiple hooks, you can make the leader length longer or shorter if you're making them yourself. Different companies have probably different preferences on their lengths. Doesn't matter, sometimes yes, sometimes no. It goes to, you have to figure out what the fish are biting on too. If you go out and you have 3 guys in a boat, don't put the same thing on every rod and just go with it. Put 6 different rigs out. You start getting hits, and you can start shifting them over. And if you have a magic color that's just on fire, well, you can put them all to that if you want. But make sure you use variety. You're gonna have to figure out what the fish bite. Like I said, midsummer, slow death, that's always out on one of my rods, right off the bat. So let's go to speed. And with that, we'll go current. And we'll talk a little bit about both. How fast should you go? Again, that's a trial and error thing. If you have a bunch of different lines out, you may want to test your speed, 0.5 mile an hour to 1.2 mile an hour, and see what actually works. See what the fish want. And along with that speed goes direction. If the fish happen to be laying one way on the bottom and you're going past them, and say you're coming from the back to the front, they may like that. They may jump up there and grab that bait as it goes by, or they may want it coming in their face and they see it coming and they swipe at it. So you're gonna have to play around to see. And that goes with current too. A lot of times here in the Midwest, we're fishing on the Missouri River, so they'll be running the hydroelectric dams at different times of the day, and you'll get different speeds of water coming through, which will affect your presentation. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit with weight, but that will affect your speed as well, and your direction and your presentation. There's a lot of variables. If you're in a lake with no water flow, it narrows them down a little bit, makes things a little easier. When you get to a river, especially the Missouri, and I would think like the Mississippi, never fished on that. I know Chad has fished on a lake up in Washington State, but he pulls plugs when he's up there because that's what works there. But all these rivers throw different variables in, and especially when you're live baiting like that. Let's get to the weight, and then we'll get to the bottom or perceived bottom. We'll get to that too. So weight, what weight should you use? I think this is maybe a 1 1/4, probably matches this bag of them right here, 1 1/4 ounces. But then we have 2 ounce, 4.5 ounces. What's the best weight? I make them in all kinds of different weights. What am I gonna use? Do I want it super light so I can feel when they pull on that? Well, let's take a look here. This goes directly to the loop here and up. So if they're tugging on here, this really doesn't come into play so much because you're there to there. The weight keeps you in the zone of where you want to be. And there is a bit of tactics involved as well. I'll go over that first. First is how I rig out a boat when I have a group of people in it. If I'm in the front running the boat, I'm running 2-ounce bottom bouncers. And you say, oh man, that's a heavy bottom bouncer. You betcha it is. 9 times out of 10, I've got the heaviest bottom bouncer in the boat on my rigs. Why? Because as you move through the water, what happens? It pushes them back. And if you go light on the front and they start swinging back and you got somebody heavier in the middle or heavier in the back, you're going to get tangled up and it's going to be a mess and it's going to probably ruin your day. You'll get real upset real quick about it. So go with heavier in the front, a little less in the middle, and lighter in the back. That way you can spread all those out. Unless you're drifting. If you're drifting, you're all going off one side of the boat. You can all be the same. Doesn't matter because you're going across like this. A lot of times I use my electric and I pull. Another little thing that I haven't mentioned yet, you can drift or you can pull. You have drift socks in there that just lay in the water to slow you down as you're going and spread everybody out of boat. Go a certain direction because that's working. You have a nice breeze to push you and then you just go around to the top again and work across. We used to do that all the time in years past. That works great. I like pulling a little bit. I can work some coves, I can work some points and things like that. We'll talk about that a little bit more here. But there is your weights for bottom bouncers for setting up a boat if you're pulling rigs. Now, how much weight do you need? Let's get back to the river thing. If you have current, you're going to have to adjust a couple of things to stay in contact with the bottom. The weight of your bottom bouncer, the amount of line. So if you're going through in a certain speed and it's hanging up here, you may have to let out more line to get it down to here, which is very important if you have multiple people in that boat and you're trying to keep those separated. Also remember, the goal of a bottom bouncer is not to lay it flat on the bottom and drag it along to see if you can get this chunk of lead snagged. It's meant to dance across the bottom on the bottom of that wire. So the more vertical, the better. You're not running horizontal, you want to be vertical. So that weighs into your weight thing as well. But if you're going against current, it's going to swing it out there more. You might have to get more line out. If you're in deeper water, the depth of your water varies because that line going up to your pole and this piece of lead will catch water and will make it drift up off the bottom. So you may have to let out additional line to get it to the bottom in deeper instances. You may really have to step it up and put heavier bottom bouncers on there to get it to the bottom in really deep water. So the weight of your bottom bouncer is really going to make a difference, and you're really going to have to calculate out what you want and how you're going to fish. If you're fishing in a regular lake where you don't have any current and you're just kind of cruising around or doing a little drift and it's only 15 feet deep, you could throw 1 1/4 ounce on, set her down there, and you skim across just fine. You get on the Missouri River and they're really pushing some water and you're working against the current and you're out in 40 feet of water because the walleyes have dove deep in the river and you're focusing in on those. You're going to have to put on a heavier bottom bouncer and put out more line to get down to that bottom area so that you can get into the zone for the bottom. Now let's get into perceived bottom. Now we've talked about why there are needs for different weights on bottom bouncers and what you're going to need to do to get it to, I'm going to say, the perceived bottom right here again. And you're going to say, what do you mean perceived bottom? Well, if you get into a lake, a deep lake, and you all of a sudden see a line down, partway down in that water column in the middle of summer, and you're fishing below that line, but you don't see any fish. All the fish are above that line, but you're like, I got to get to the bottom. So you're putting on a big bottom bouncer, you're getting down there. That's the cool water. That's where they're going to be. I got to get down to them. But the perceived bottom, so that line that I'm talking about in the midsummer on a lake like that is called the thermocline. And below that thermocline, there's probably no oxygen, so the fish won't be there. But say you're marking them above there, you can use the bottom bouncers to get down there. You just have to figure out how much line you need out to get to that level so that you can find those fish that are hanging at that level. You can almost pull them like you'd be pulling plugs, and live baiters would probably say, don't say that phrase. I know, I do everything though, so it doesn't matter to me. But you can use these to work open water out in the middle of nowhere to get down to a certain level. You just have to figure out how much line you need out, just like a plug bill, digging it down there. This is gonna dig it down there, and that crawler harness back there spinning away, that may be the key to getting those walleyes in that area. So that, in that case, is your perceived bottom. Where the walleyes are suspended at, you can use them for suspended. I use bottom bouncers to go over weeds. If I have an area, and there's a certain lake in the state that I live in, that's way up north, that is known for weeds, and a lot of people pull plugs on that lake, but I'll go out with these, and if that weed line is 3 feet down, and I can tick through those weeds with this bottom bouncer and have the bait going up above, those walleyes will come out of those weeds and go after that bait. It works, I've done it, so there's that. You know, normally your situation with a bottom bouncer, you're looking at being on the bottom, going across the bottom. Again, use your electronics, know where your fish are, but you can go through boulder fields, bounce across the top of boulder fields, through gravelly bottoms, tick the tops of trees. Whatever your perceived bottom is, you just figure out how much weight, what speed, how much line out to get to the depth you want to be so that you can put the bait in the zone where the fish are. Then it's up to the fish whether they like the presentation you're giving them or not. But that is what I call the perceived bottom. Most of the time we think bottom as bottom, and a lot of times, truthfully, that's what you're doing. You're working in coves and bays. That's another plus with bottom bouncers. If you're out there pulling plugs, you see those guys out in the open shooting the long distance. Why is that? Because they're covering a lot of ground. That's what plugging does. It gives you distance. You can get that area covered. But I've had times where I've worked into little coves where there's boulder fields. There was a time, I remember many years ago, I got into an area where there was a boulder field. You wouldn't have been able to pull plugs in this tight in area. I did little figure eights with the bottom bouncers and had the entire boat's worth of limits. I think there were 4 of us in the boat that day in 30 minutes. So you can hone into a small area in a bay or a cove or small boulder field where a plug puller won't be able to do that. They'd have to make, one, they might not be able to get into the area that you're in. 2, they're gonna have to make longer pulls because they've got 100 feet of line out behind those boats. They're gonna have to make big circles. If you're using heavier bottom bouncers and you're working a real vertical, you can tighten up that figure eight and you can really hone in and get those fish. So there you go. There are some advanced tactics. I hope this is helpful for you. Please comment down below. If you have any other questions, please ask. If I can answer them, I will. But there's some information on rigs and weights and speeds and amount of line out. A lot of information. It's not as easy as just throwing it over the side and dragging it along. You can do that. But to significantly up your odds of a successful day on the water, implement these advanced tactics and hopefully we see your catches go up. This is Dan with 3D Outdoors, reminding you to get into the outdoors and enjoy everything it has to offer. If you like this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. That way you get notified when I upload videos. And also, please come over to the website, 3d-outdoors.com. That's where we pull all of the stuff together. We keep an archive there, rotate videos on a quarterly basis, and just try to pull everything together there. Thanks for watching. See you next time.